an original narrated audio story by Forbidden Romance Stories. Margaret Thornfield stood frozen in the grand ballroom as the Duke of Westmoreland approached, the candlelight casting dramatic shadows across his handsome face. While the assembled nobility held their collective breath, her sister Sophia's fingers tightened into fists within the folds of her golden gown, her perfect features hardening with anticipated triumph. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs as the Duke's intense gaze fixed not on her radiant sister, but inexplicably on her, the forgotten daughter, the invisible companion, the girl who had spent a lifetime being overlooked. When he bowed deeply before her, instead of Sophia, the gasps that rippled through the crowd matched the impossible question forming in Margaret's mind. How could the most powerful man in the county choose the shadow when the sun stood right beside her? Margaret Thornfield had long ago accepted her place in the world, forever in the shadow of her younger sister, Sophia. It wasn't merely that Sophia possessed extraordinary beauty with her golden curls and perfect complexion. It was that their mother had decided, from the moment of Sophia's birth, that she would be the family's salvation. "Margaret, fix your sister's hair before dinner," her mother would command, not bothering to glance at Margaret's own hastily arranged brown locks. "The Viscount's son will be joining us." At 19, Margaret had grown accustomed to such dismissals. She was 2 years Sophia's senior, but might as well have been a servant in their modest but respectable home at Thornfield Manor. Not that the manor truly belonged to them anymore. Their father's death had left them with little, besides a respectable name and mounting debts. What few people noticed about Margaret was that, behind her unremarkable features, lay remarkable gifts, while Sophia learned to bat her eyelashes and laugh melodiously at gentlemen's jokes. Margaret had taught herself 3 languages from their father's old books. While Sophia practiced walking with books balanced on her head, Margaret composed music that she played only when alone. Her fingers moved across piano keys with a passion she never dared show in company. "You read too much," her mother often scolded. "No man wants a wife whose mind wanders beyond household matters." Margaret would nod dutifully while hiding poetry volumes beneath her bed. The spring morning that changed everything arrived with the thundering of hooves and a messenger bearing an envelope sealed with wax the color of blood. Margaret was in the garden cutting flowers when her mother's scream of delight pierced the air. "Sophia, Margaret, come at once." Inside, her mother clutched the letter to her chest, eyes gleaming with triumph. "The Duke of Westmoreland is hosting a 3-day celebration at Blackwood Castle, and we, my dears, have been invited." Sophia clapped her hands. "The Duke, mother, is it true he's seeking a bride?" "Indeed." Their mother's smile was calculating. 30 years old, unmarried, and the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties. "They say he's handsome as sin and twice as rich." Margaret stood silently, knowing what would come next. "We must prepare you immediately, Sophia. New gowns, dancing lessons refreshed." Her mother turned to Margaret as an afterthought. "You'll accompany your sister, of course. A young lady cannot attend such events without proper companionship." "Yes, mother," Margaret replied, her voice even. The following weeks transformed their home into a workshop dedicated to Sophia's elevation. Dressmakers came and went, leaving threads and fabric scraps in their wake. Dancing masters counted steps, while Sophia whirled across the drawing room. Margaret was fitted for 2 simple gowns, practical, unadorned, designed not to outshine. "Remember your place," her mother instructed the night before their departure. "You are there to support your sister, to ensure she never lacks for refreshment or conversation partners. The Duke has entertained half the eligible young women in England. Sophia must stand out." "I understand my role perfectly," Margaret replied, keeping her tone light despite the familiar ache in her chest. That night, alone in her room, Margaret allowed herself a single moment of rebellion. She opened her journal and wrote, "What would it be like to be seen, truly seen, just once?" Then she closed the book, tucked it into her traveling case, and extinguished the candle. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Trunks were loaded. Sophia was fussed over, and Margaret ensured everything was in order. As they settled into the carriage, Sophia's excitement bubbled over. "They say the Duke reads excessively and speaks 4 languages. Sophia recited information she'd memorized to impress him. He traveled extensively through Italy and Greece. Margaret's interest flickered despite herself. Does he appreciate art from his travels? Who cares about dusty paintings? Sophia laughed. He owns half of Yorkshire and has 10,000 a year. That's what matters. Their mother nodded approvingly, while Margaret turned to watch the countryside pass by. She had no illusions about the coming days. She would be a shadow, a handmaid, a wallflower against which Sophia's beauty would shine more brightly. She would sit in corners with other companions and chaperones, watching life happen to other people. Yet something fluttered in her chest. Not hope, for she had learned not to hope, but perhaps curiosity. Blackwood Castle was rumored to house one of the finest libraries in England. Perhaps between her duties to Sophia, she might find a quiet moment among books that didn't judge her plain face or practical nature. As the carriage rolled toward their destination, Margaret closed her eyes and made a private promise to herself. She would endure these 3 days with grace, find small pleasures where she could, and return home unchanged, but for a few precious memories to sustain her through the years ahead. What she could not possibly know was that the Duke of Westmoreland was about to upend every expectation, every certainty, and every unspoken rule that had defined her existence. Blackwood Castle rose from the mist like something from a fairy tale. All gray stone towers and soaring battlements, its windows gleaming like cat's eyes in the late afternoon sun. Margaret pressed her face to the carriage window, drinking in the sight, while Sophia hurriedly checked her reflection in a small hand mirror. Her chin up, shoulders back. Their mother instructed as the carriage rolled through massive iron gates. The Duke may not notice you immediately, Sophia, but by the final night, you must ensure you are all he sees. The courtyard bustled with activity, footmen in livery, other carriages disgorging ladies in fine silks, gentlemen in formal attire. Margaret stepped down and immediately felt invisible amid the splendor. Her dove-gray traveling dress, practical and unadorned, contrasted sharply with Sophia's azure ensemble that matched her eyes perfectly. A steward led them through vaulted hallways, where ancient tapestries depicted hunting scenes and battles, long forgotten. Margaret couldn't help but slow her pace, captivated by the history surrounding them, until her mother's sharp glance urged her forward. "The Duke welcomes you to Blackwood," the steward intoned as they reached a grand receiving room. "He will greet all guests formally at dinner." Their assigned chambers were adjacent. Sophia's large and facing the manicured gardens, Margaret's smaller but comfortable. No sooner had the maids unpacked their trunks than a bell sounded, announcing 1 hour until dinner. "Help your sister with her hair," their mother commanded. "The golden combs, I think. And make sure the neckline of her gown sits just so." Margaret obliged, her fingers working deftly through Sophia's golden curls, while her sister chattered nervously about the competition. For competition it was, with at least a dozen eligible young ladies in attendance, each hoping to capture the Duke's attention. Lady Harrington's daughter has a squint, and the Pembroke girl is pretty but dull as dishwater, Sophia assessed. "My greatest concern is Lady Caroline Winters. They say the Duke danced with her twice at the Midsummer Ball in London." Margaret secured the final comb. "There, you look lovely." Sophia barely glanced at her. "What will you wear?" "The navy silk." "Good. It's plain enough." When they descended the grand staircase, Sophia on their mother's arm and Margaret following 2 steps behind, the great hall was already filled with guests. Footmen circulated with champagne, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Margaret accepted a glass and drifted toward the periphery, her practiced position. The announcement came with the striking of a gong. His Grace, the Duke of Westmoreland. Conversation ceased as all eyes turned toward the entrance. Margaret found herself rising on tiptoes, despite herself, curious about this man who commanded such attention. Edward Blackwood, Duke of Westmoreland, was not what she expected, tall and broad-shouldered, but lacking the pompous expression she'd anticipated. His features were strong rather than classically handsome. A straight nose, firm jaw darkened slightly with the shadow of a beard, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore his formal attire with the ease of a man, who might be equally comfortable in riding clothes. Welcome to Blackwood. His voice carried without effort. I'm honored by your presence, and hope these 3 days bring pleasure to all. His eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on each group. When his gaze passed over where Margaret stood, she felt a curious sensation, as though he had actually seen her rather than looking through her as most did. But then he moved on, and dinner was announced. Sophia, by design, was seated at a table near the Duke's, while Margaret found herself at the furthest remove, beside an elderly countess who spoke exclusively of her ailments, and a clergyman who ate in complete silence. She ate methodically, watching as Sophia laughed and charmed those around her. After dinner came dancing. Margaret positioned herself near the refreshment table, ready to fetch lemonade when Sophia required it. The Duke opened the dancing with Lady Caroline, then proceeded through what was clearly a diplomatic rotation of partners. He hasn't asked Sophia yet, her mother muttered, appearing suddenly at Margaret's side. Go remind your sister to smile more genuinely. She looks calculating. As the evening wore on, the Duke did eventually partner with Sophia, who executed every step flawlessly. Margaret watched her sister's triumphant expression and felt the familiar hollow ache, not envy. Precisely. She had never coveted Sophia's position, but perhaps longing for a world where she might be valued for her own qualities. When the music finally ended near midnight, Margaret was exhausted from standing. While Sophia and their mother dissected every interaction with the Duke, Margaret slipped away with a candle, unable to resist exploring the castle's shadowed corridors. She found the library by accident, following the scent of leather-bound books and beeswax polish. Easing the heavy door open, she gasped softly. 3 stories of books rose around her, accessible by rolling ladders and spiral staircases. A fire burned low in the grate, casting golden light across reading tables and deep armchairs. Margaret set her candle down and approached the nearest shelf reverently. First editions of Shakespeare, philosophical treatises, travel journals, treasures beyond imagining. She selected a volume of Greek poetry and curled into a chair, losing herself in ancient verses. Euripides, an unusual choice for a midnight reading. The voice startled her so badly, she nearly dropped the book. The Duke stood in the doorway, his formal jacket discarded, cravat loosened, up close. His eyes were a startling shade of green, like sun through forest leaves. Margaret scrambled to her feet, cursing awkwardly. Your Grace, I apologize for the intrusion. I didn't. He raised a hand. Please, don't apologize for appreciating my library. It's refreshing to find a guest who values books over gossip. She clutched the volume to her chest. I should return to my chambers. Can you read Greek, or do you admire the translations? He asked, ignoring her attempt to leave. The question surprised her. Both, Your Grace. My father believed daughters should be educated beyond decorative accomplishments. Something flickered in his expression. Interest, perhaps. A progressive view. And do you find Euripides' treatment of women in his tragedies sympathetic or condemning? Margaret hesitated, then answered honestly, forgetting momentarily whom she addressed. Neither. I believe he saw women as they were, trapped by circumstance yet possessing inner lives of tremendous complexity. A smile touched his lips. Well answered. He gestured to the shelves. The library is open to all guests during your stay. Few will take advantage, I suspect. Thank you, Your Grace. She curtsied again, more gracefully this time. As she slipped past him toward the door, he added, I didn't catch your name. Margaret Thornfield, Your Grace. Miss Thornfield. He nodded. Enjoy your stay at Blackwood. Only when she was halfway back to her chamber did Margaret realize that for perhaps the first time in her adult life, someone had seen her, truly seen her, and spoken to her as though her thoughts mattered. She fell asleep with the unfamiliar warmth of that recognition still glowing in her chest. By the second day of their stay, Sophia had established herself among the Duke's favored circle. At breakfast, she was seated just 3 places from him. During the archery competition on the south lawn, he applauded her modest attempt. Margaret fulfilled her duties diligently, fetching refreshments, arranging Sophia's shawl against the breeze, remaining invisible except when needed. He's warming to her, their mother whispered triumphantly, as they watched Sophia laugh at something the Duke said. "Lady Caroline is clearly falling from favor." Margaret nodded absently, her thoughts drifting to the library, and whether she might find another opportunity to visit. The previous night's encounter with the Duke seemed dreamlike in morning's light. Surely he had already forgotten their brief conversation. The afternoon brought a musical recital in the grand salon. Several young ladies performed, Sophia among them, playing a simple piece on the pianoforte with technical correctness, if little passion. Margaret sat in the back row, hands folded in her lap, until a footman approached with a folded note. "For Miss Margaret Thornfield," he murmured, bowing slightly. Bewildered, she opened it to find elegant handwriting. The Greek poets have excellent company in the East Wing. Blake, Wordsworth, and some rather controversial Mary Wollstonecraft. The library remains at your disposal. E.B. Margaret's cheeks warmed as she quickly tucked the note into her sleeve. The Duke had remembered not only their conversation, but her name. More surprisingly, he had taken the trouble to direct her toward books he thought might interest her. When the recital ended, she made her excuses. "I have a slight headache. I believe I'll rest before dinner." Her mother frowned, but was too preoccupied with Sophia's prospects to object strongly. "Don't be late for dinner. The blue gown tonight, it's sufficiently modest." Margaret slipped away to the East Wing, finding the library blissfully empty. True to his word, a collection of poetry and political philosophy awaited on a small table, as though arranged specifically for her. She lost herself in Wollstonecraft's radical ideas about women's education until the light began to fade, warning that she must prepare for dinner. That night, the Duke's diplomatic hosting continued, though Margaret noticed his gaze occasionally finding her across the room. Once, when their eyes met, he inclined his head slightly, a private acknowledgement that sent an unexpected thrill through her. Unable to sleep after another evening of watching from the sidelines, Margaret rose before dawn the next morning. She wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and slipped out to the gardens, drawn by the pale light spreading across the eastern sky. Morning mist curled around the hedgerows and rose beds, creating a dreamlike landscape. Without conscious thought, she began to sing softly, an old folk song her father had taught her, about a bird that flies free while its mate remains caged. Her voice, clear and true, carried in the still morning air. "You have a beautiful voice." Margaret whirled around, clutching her shawl tighter. The Duke stood on the garden path, dressed for riding in boots and a greatcoat. His hair was tousled by the morning breeze. "Your Grace, I apologize. For blessing my gardens with music?" He approached, stopping at a respectful distance. "Please don't. That song, it's Northumbrian, isn't it?" She nodded, surprised by his recognition. "My father was from the north. It speaks of freedom and constraint, an interesting choice." Margaret looked away. Sometimes we sing what we feel without intending to reveal ourselves. "And do you feel constrained, Miss Thornfield?" The directness of his question startled her. No one had ever asked about her feelings before. "We all have our duties," she answered carefully. "Indeed. Mine include selecting a bride, or so society reminds me constantly." His tone held a wryness that made her glance up. "Yet duty need not exclude happiness. Don't you agree?" Before she could answer, a gardener appeared, breaking the moment. The Duke bowed. "Until later, Miss Thornfield." Throughout the day, Margaret felt his attention like sunlight, warming her even from across crowded rooms. During luncheon, he asked her opinion on a book they had both read. While guests played lawn games, he walked briefly beside her, commenting on the castle's history. These small interactions did not go unnoticed. Her mother cornered her in the afternoon. "What game are you playing?" she hissed. "The Duke has spoken to you 3 times today," while barely acknowledging Sophia. "No game, Mother. We merely discussed books." "Books!" Her mother's face flushed with anger. "Do you think a duke seeks intellectual companionship from a penniless girl? He's merely being polite. Meanwhile, you distract him from Sophia, who could save this family from ruin." The accusation stung because Margaret had begun to wonder the same thing. Why would the Duke notice her? Perhaps it was pity or amusement at her bookishness. "I'll keep my distance," she promised. The brief happiness she'd felt crumbling to ash. That evening, as guests gathered for the grand ball that would conclude their stay. Margaret dressed in her plainest gown, a high-necked brown silk that made her skin appear sallow. She arranged her hair simply and wore no jewelry. Sophia, by contrast, was resplendent in gold-embroidered ivory that set off her perfect complexion and golden curls. Their mother had spent the last of their ready money on gold combs for her hair. Tonight, the Duke will declare himself, their mother predicted, adjusting Sophia's neckline. Half the ton expects it. Lady Caroline has already been weeping in her chamber. Margaret nodded, accepting her role once more. She would stand in shadows, fetch refreshments, and watch her sister claim the prize everyone expected her to win. Yet as they descended to the ballroom, Margaret could not entirely quell the treacherous hope that had taken root in her heart. The ballroom of Blackwood Castle blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflected in gilded mirrors, and the jewels adorning the county's finest. Footmen in livery stood at attention along the walls, while a 20-piece orchestra tuned their instruments on a raised platform. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows across marble floors, polished to a mirror shine. Margaret positioned herself discreetly near a column, watching as Sophia made her entrance on their mother's arm. A murmur of appreciation followed her sister's progress through the crowd. Sophia truly did look like a fairy tale princess, her golden gown catching the light with every movement. "She'll outshine even Lady Caroline tonight," whispered a matron nearby, unaware of Margaret's connection. The Duke would be a fool to look elsewhere. Margaret nodded politely and turned away, focusing on the orchestra as they began the first waltz. Couples swept onto the floor in a swirl of color and movement. The Duke, as host, opened the dancing with the elderly Countess of Pembroke, a diplomatic choice that disappointed several young ladies who had positioned themselves hopefully nearby. For the first hour, Margaret observed the patterns of the evening unfolding exactly as expected. The Duke danced with a succession of eligible young women, spending precisely the same amount of time with each to avoid showing preference. Sophia took her turn, executing every step flawlessly while gazing up at him with practiced adoration. When the dance ended, Sophia returned to their mother's side, cheeks flushed with triumph. "He complimented my dancing and asked about my interests." "Excellent," their mother approved. "What did you tell him?" "That I adore poetry and philosophy, just as you suggested." Margaret suppressed a smile at the irony. Sophia had never voluntarily read a poem in her life. As the evening progressed, Margaret fulfilled her usual role, fetching refreshments, holding Sophia's fan when she danced with other partners, blending into the background. Yet she felt the Duke's gaze finding her occasionally, and each time their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Shortly before midnight, a footman approached with a message. "The Duke requests all guests assemble in the grand ballroom in 15 minutes. He has an announcement." Excited whispers rippled through the gathering. Everyone knew what this meant. The Duke was ready to declare his choice of bride. Ladies hurried to refresh their appearances, while gentlemen straightened their cravats and prepared to offer congratulations. "This is it." Their mother gripped Sophia's arm, eyes gleaming. "Stand tall, smile gently, and remember everything we practiced for accepting his offer." Margaret moved to withdraw to the periphery of the room, but her mother caught her arm. "No, you'll stand with us. It will look better for Sophia to have family beside her for the announcement." Reluctantly, Margaret took her place slightly behind Sophia, as guests gathered in a semicircle, facing the main staircase. The Duke had disappeared momentarily, presumably to prepare for his declaration. Lady Caroline stood with her family opposite them, her expression a mixture of hope and resignation. The orchestra fell silent. A hush descended as the Duke appeared at the top of the staircase, resplendent in formal evening attire, with his family's ceremonial sash across his chest. He descended slowly, his expression unreadable. "My honored guests," he began when he reached the bottom, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "These 3 days have brought me great pleasure in your company. As you know, tradition dictates that the Master of Blackwood should not remain unmarried past his 30th year." A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. Sophia straightened, her smile fixed in place. "I have given this matter considerable thought," the Duke continued, "and have discovered that the heart cannot be governed by expectation alone, but must follow its true inclination." He began to move through the crowd, which parted before him like water. Margaret's heart pounded as he approached their small family group. Their mother's grip on Sophia's arm tightened visibly. The Duke stopped directly before them. For one suspended moment, Margaret thought he was looking at Sophia. Then, with deliberate purpose, he shifted his gaze and stepped to the side, positioning himself squarely before Margaret. A collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. Sophia's perfect smile faltered. Their mother's face drained of color. "Miss Margaret Thornfield," the Duke said, his voice clear enough for all to hear. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" The world seemed to stop. Margaret felt as though she were underwater, sounds muffled, vision blurring at the edges. This couldn't be happening. It was a mistake, a cruel jest, a dream from which she would awaken. "I, your grace," she stammered, unable to form a coherent response. He extended his hand, waiting with perfect patience. In his eyes, she saw not mockery, but something earnest and hopeful. With trembling fingers, Margaret placed her hand in his. Behind her, she heard her mother's sharp intake of breath and Sophia's muffled sound of disbelief. The Duke led her to the center of the ballroom. At his signal, the orchestra began a waltz. Not the customary one for such announcements, but the same folk melody she had been singing in the garden at dawn. He had remembered, had instructed the musicians specifically. "Everyone is staring," Margaret whispered as he guided her into the first steps. "Let them," he replied, his hand warm and steady at her waist. "I've spent my life being stared at. One grows accustomed to it. But why me? Sophia is beautiful, accomplished, and perfectly trained to be a duchess," he finished for her. "As are a dozen other young ladies here tonight. All of them want the title, the castle, the fortune. And I don't," she asked, finding her voice at last. His smile was genuine, reaching his eyes. "I have never admired someone who wasn't trying to be admired." The simplicity of his statement struck her to the core. All her life, Margaret had tried to shrink herself, to be invisible, to take up less space. Yet somehow, in doing so, she had become visible to him as they turned about the floor. Alone while hundreds watched in stunned silence, Margaret gradually became aware of the implications. Her mother's fury, Sophia's sense of betrayal, the gossip that would follow, the suspicion that would fall on her, that she had somehow schemed for this outcome. The dance ended too soon, though Margaret felt as though they had been spinning for an eternity. The Duke bowed formally over her hand, then straightened to address his guests once more. "I thank you all for your attendance. The celebrations will continue tomorrow with a hunt and picnic for those who wish to remain." It was not the declaration of engagement everyone had expected, but the meaning was clear enough. The Duke had made his preference known in the most public way possible. As he escorted Margaret back to where her family stood frozen in shock, she caught sight of her mother's face, a mask of fury and calculation. Sophia's eyes brimmed with tears of humiliation. "Mrs. Thornfield, Miss Sophia." The Duke acknowledged them politely. "Your daughter and sister does you credit." "Indeed," their mother managed through clenched teeth. "Margaret, we should retire. You look flushed." The Duke's hand tightened briefly on hers before releasing her. "Until tomorrow, Miss Thornfield." As her mother practically dragged her from the ballroom, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that the night's events had set in motion consequences she could scarcely imagine. The invisible sister had been seen at last, and nothing would ever be the same again. "How dare you!" Their mother's voice lashed through the bedchamber the moment the door closed behind them. "How long have you been plotting this betrayal?" Margaret stood by the window, still dazed by the evening's events. "I haven't plotted anything, Mother." The Duke's attention was as unexpected to me as to anyone. "Liar." Sophia flung her gold combs onto the dressing table. "I saw you speaking with him in the library, walking in the garden. While I followed Mother's every instruction, you were seducing him behind my back. Sophia, please." "We are ruined," their mother continued, pacing the room like a caged animal. Lady Harrington was already smirking. "By morning, everyone will be laughing at us." At Sophia, publicly rejected for her plain sister. Margaret flinched at the description, but held her ground. He didn't reject Sophia. He simply asked me to dance. Don't play innocent, her mother snapped. A man in his position doesn't single out a nobody unless he intends to court her, which means you've somehow tricked him. Filled his head with your bookish nonsense, while Sophia did everything right. Sophia collapsed onto the bed, tears streaking her perfect face. What will I tell everyone? How can I show my face tomorrow, knowing he chose you? The accusation in her sister's voice cut deeply. All her life, Margaret had stepped aside for Sophia, had accepted her secondary role without complaint. Now, the first time something wonderful happened to her, she was made to feel like a thief. I never sought his attention, Margaret said quietly. But neither did I reject it when it came. Is that so terrible? To be seen and valued for once? Her mother's face hardened. Listen carefully. Whatever game the Duke is playing, it ends now. Tomorrow morning, we will inform him that we are departing due to your sudden illness. When we return home, we will circulate the story that you refused his attentions out of loyalty to your sister, who had formed an attachment to him. That's a lie, Margaret protested. It's damage control, her mother countered. Sophia can still make a good match if we manage this scandal properly. In time, perhaps even the Duke will reconsider once his infatuation with you fades. Margaret felt something shift inside her. A lifetime of acquiescence giving way to resolve. No, what did you say? I said no. I won't pretend illness. I won't leave tomorrow. And I certainly won't reject the Duke's attention to preserve a fiction about Sophia's feelings for a man she cares nothing about, except for his title and fortune. Her mother slapped her hard across the face. The sudden violence shocked them all into silence. You ungrateful child, her mother whispered, trembling with rage. After everything I've sacrificed to secure this family's future, your father left us with nothing but debts and a crumbling estate. Sophia is our only hope of salvation. Margaret touched her stinging cheek. Father left us with more than you acknowledge. He left me with an education, with a love of books and ideas, with the belief that I might be worth something beyond my marriage ability. And what good has that done you until now? Her mother challenged. Would the Duke have noticed you if you weren't standing beside your beautiful sister? He's amusing himself with you. The novelty of a bookish girl among the debutantes. Doubt crept into Margaret's heart. Was her mother right? Was the Duke's interest merely a passing fancy, a momentary diversion from the beautiful women who usually surrounded him? A knock at the door interrupted their confrontation. A maid entered with a folded note. For Miss Margaret Thornfield, from His Grace. Margaret accepted it with trembling fingers. The note was brief. The Eastern Garden at sunrise. There is much I wish to discuss with you. E.B. Her mother snatched the paper from her hands and read it, her expression calculating. This changes nothing. You will not meet him. I am 19 years old, Margaret replied, a lifetime of submission falling away with each word. I am of age to make my own decisions. Then make the right one, her mother urged, her tone suddenly pleading. Think of your sister. Think of our family. Margaret looked at Sophia, who sat hunched on the bed, tears drying on her cheeks. Despite everything, she loved her sister and had never wished to cause her pain. Sophia, she said gently, did you truly form an attachment to the Duke, beyond his title and fortune? Do you care for him as a man? Sophia hesitated, then answered honestly. I hardly know him. He's handsome enough, and being a duchess would be wonderful. But, she shrugged, he talks constantly of books and ideas that bore me. I was prepared to endure that, for the advantages of the match. And there you have it, their mother interrupted. Practical considerations that you're too romantic to appreciate, Margaret. A new voice spoke from the doorway, which had been left ajar by the departing maid. Practical indeed, Mrs. Thornfield. Just as practical as the considerations that drove you to reject my father 30 years ago. The Duke stood in the corridor, his expression grave. Behind him, a servant looked mortified at the breach of propriety. Your Grace. Their mother's face drained of color. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. He stepped into the room, addressing Margaret directly. I didn't realize it until tonight, when I heard your full name, Thornfield. Your father was William Thornfield, wasn't he? The scholar who translated the Greek classics. Margaret nodded, confused by this turn in the conversation. My father courted your mother first, the Duke explained, his eyes never leaving Margaret's. She rejected him for a wealthier prospect. Your father's cousin, I believe. When that arrangement fell through, she settled for William instead, though he had only his professor's salary and modest inheritance. Their mother sank into a chair, her composure finally cracking. How could you possibly know this? My father kept her letters. I found them after his death. His voice softened. He eventually found happiness with my mother, but he never forgot his first love, the woman who chose fortune over affection. Margaret struggled to absorb this revelation, this hidden history that suddenly explained so much about her mother's bitterness, her obsession with advantageous marriages, her dismissal of Margaret's scholarly interests that mirrored her father's. History need not repeat itself, the Duke said quietly, unless we allow it to. In the silence that followed, Margaret felt the weight of the past and the possibility of the future hanging in perfect balance. Dawn painted the eastern gardens in shades of gold and rose as Margaret made her way along the gravel path. She had slept little, her mind churning with revelations and possibilities. After the Duke's departure the previous night, her mother had retreated into stony silence, while Sophia had alternated between tears and thoughtful contemplation. The Duke waited beside a marble fountain, his formal attire replaced by simpler morning clothes. When he saw her, his face brightened with a smile that eased some of Margaret's doubts. You came, he said, extending his hand. She took it briefly, then stepped back to maintain propriety. I have questions, Your Grace. Edward, he corrected gently. When we're alone, at least. Edward. His name felt intimate on her tongue. Why didn't you tell me about my mother's connection to your family? I didn't know until I heard your surname announced formally at the ball. Even then, I wasn't certain until I saw her reaction to me. He gestured toward a bench. Please sit. Margaret settled beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. My mother believes you're interested in me, only as some form of revenge against her. Is that what you believe? She studied his face, the earnest green eyes, the mouth that curved easily into smiles. I don't know what to believe. 3 days ago, I was invisible. Now I'm the center of a drama I never sought. You were never invisible to me, he said simply. From the moment I found you in my library, I saw someone extraordinary. A woman with depth of thought, genuine passion for ideas, and a soul that shines through her eyes when she speaks of things that matter to her. Margaret felt warmth spread through her chest. But surely there are many educated women in your circle, women with greater beauty, higher connections. I've met countless, beautiful, well-connected women, he interrupted. They've been paraded before me since I came of age. What I haven't found is authenticity. Someone who speaks her mind, rather than what she thinks I wish to hear, who values knowledge for its own sake, rather than as a tool for advancement. A breeze stirred the garden, carrying the scent of roses. In the distance, servants could be seen preparing the terrace for breakfast. I don't expect you to declare yourself today, Edward continued. In fact, I would prefer you didn't. 3 days is too short a time to truly know one's heart. Yet you've caused quite a scandal by singling me out, Margaret observed. He smiled ruefully. Perhaps that was selfish of me. I wanted to ensure you wouldn't disappear from my life after today. Society expects me to choose a bride, but I'd rather court a woman properly, first exchange letters, arrange proper visits, allow genuine feeling to grow. The simplicity of his proposal touched her deeply. Not a whirlwind romance or calculated alliance, but something thoughtful and measured, a foundation that might support real happiness. My mother will never approve, Margaret said, though without the resignation that would have colored such a statement days earlier. And does that determine your choice? Before she could answer, footsteps on the gravel announced another's approach. They turned to see Sophia walking toward them, her golden hair hastily arranged, her expression uncertain. Margaret tensed, preparing for accusations or tears. But Sophia surprised her. Your Grace, she curtsied formally, then turned to Margaret. May I speak with my sister privately? Edward rose immediately. Of course, I'll wait on the terrace. When he had gone, Sophia took his place on the bench. For a moment, the sisters sat in silence, each searching for words. "I've been thinking all night," Sophia finally began, "about what you asked, whether I truly cared for the Duke beyond his position. And," Margaret prompted gently, "and I realized something about myself that isn't very flattering." Sophia plucked nervously at her sleeve. "I've never considered what I truly want, only what Mother told me I should want: the right husband, the right position, the right jewels." Margaret covered her sister's restless hand with her own. "It's not too late to discover your own desires." "That's just it." Sophia looked up, her blue eyes clear and determined. "I don't want to be a duchess if it means spending my life discussing books I don't care about. I don't want a husband who values qualities I don't possess." "Sophia, let me finish. I was angry last night because I felt humiliated. But in truth, the Duke would make me miserable, and I would likely make him equally unhappy." She squeezed Margaret's hand. "You, however, light up when he speaks to you. I've never seen you that way before." Tears pricked at Margaret's eyes. "I never meant to hurt you." "I know." Sophia smiled tremulously. "Mother is still furious. But I've told her I won't participate in any schemes to separate you and the Duke. This is your chance, Margaret. After a lifetime of putting everyone else first, you deserve to be chosen." The sisters embraced, a new understanding between them. When they parted, Margaret saw Edward waiting patiently on the terrace, the morning light gilding his profile. "What will you do?" Sophia asked, smoothing her skirts with suddenly steady hands. "I'm going to see where this path leads, not as the invisible sister, not as a replacement for you, but as myself, just as I am." As she walked toward Edward, Margaret felt the weight of expectations falling away. For the first time in her life, she moved not in someone else's shadow, but in her own light, toward a future where being seen, truly seen, was only the beginning.